it didn't take me long to realize that silence doesn't solve the problem. It just makes me a part of the pattern. Welcome to the Humaning Well podcast. My name is Amber Cabral, and today I want to talk about bullying. I realize a lot of adults are kind of being bullied, and I think that there's a solution for that. So I'm going to try to address it in this episode. First of all, I want to just say that bullying as an adult doesn't necessarily look like a fight on a playground. Sometimes it's a coworker who talks to you like, you're lucky to be here, talks down to you, or it's a friend who takes cheap shots at you and then calls it honesty, or it's a partner who jokes about your insecurities and calls it love. Personally, I don't tolerate any of that. And I want all of us to not tolerate any of that, because at the end of the day, when bullies get an itch, what they do is they just keep taking more and more and more and more until everyone is uncomfortable except them and no one wants to say anything. And candidly, life is hard enough. So why do we need to navigate this way, right? Now, it's been a very long time since I was bullied. The last time I can remember sort of being bullied, I was working at Walmart. I had a leader who really enjoyed making an example out of me because they felt like I could take it. Honestly, I was on a team of respectfully mostly mediocre performers. I had built a reputation that essentially had granted me a lot of visibility and opportunity. I built relationships with a lot of senior leaders because I delivered well. And so what ends up happening? Well, the people who were not performing as well started to kind of tell on me. Oh, Amber makes me feel intimidated when she speaks up in the meetings, or it seems like Amber's always on a special project or whatever. And so the next thing I know, my leadership is yelling at me literally in meetings in front of others. You need to be quiet. You're taking all the air out of the room. But then if I don't say anything and I would intentionally quiet to try to make room for other people, I would kind of get this energy of well, people notice when you don't speak up and you need to do a better job of showing up for your colleagues or whatever, And so it was just this constant kind of, state of back and forth. And so it was harassment as well as bullying, essentially. And ultimately, I had to stand up to those leaders to let them know, this is inappropriate. The bullying is abusive. And honestly, if I'm looking back with clearer vision, it's probably a contributor to why I left the company. I don't talk to any of those leaders anymore, though I definitely know that they still see my life, right? Which is kind of nice when you consider that I'm okay, right? But in any case, there's a reason that it's been a long time since I've gotten bullied, and I mostly don't get bullied. I think it has something to do with the way that I carry myself, my general energy, just messages that I don't tolerate mess. I'm not mean or bossy, but sometimes I think people kind of pick up an energy from me that just sort of commands respect. And I'll be honest, it's taken me years to become this woman, but I don't think you have to be like me or have the same type of presence to hold people to account for respecting you. I also don't think you have to be mean or bossy. Now, you do need to be brave and you do need to be willing to speak up even when things are uncomfortable. So let's get into how you can navigate bullying, right? Let's just get into talking about what it is, how we're going to handle it, etc. So first, bullying can be emotional, verbal, or behavioral. It's not always someone pushing you or being loud or violent. It can also be a bit more subtle. And adult bullying, in my experience, kind of hides behind professionalism or friendship or care or looking out. And at work, it might show up as sabotage or public shaming or excluding someone or manipulating someone, or wrapping a really kind of shady message up in something called feedback, so that the person who essentially putting you on display or never gives you credit publicly will openly critique you in front of other people, as an example. Now, in friendships, it's the friend who only feels good when you feel small. So maybe you just had a really tough turn of events and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect time for us to go out and celebrate my birthday, without any regard for what it is that you're navigating. Or maybe they hit you with oh, I know things are tough, but at least you have fill in the blank. So that can also be how it shows up in friendship. In your household, it could be the partner who's controlling your decisions or undermining your confidence. They crack jokes on you about how you handle things. They may even rope in others on the joke. In fact, I have an example where a friend of mine was dating a guy who did this literally within minutes of meeting me. And it was an immediate hard no. I was just like, Yeah, you don't bond with me by cracking jokes on my friend. Like, that's just not how we do it. You bond with me by showing me how much you adore my friend. When you're doing that, essentially it's bullying, and no one needs that. So I just wasn't cool with him, right? The way I kind of summarize what bullying is and how it looks, because it can show up in so many different forms, is that essentially bullying, it's about power, but without the empathy. It's someone needing to feel big at someone else's expense. And power dynamics are real, but there are some folks who exercise their power with care. Those folks we learn from, we feel safe around, we trust them. They're our mentors and our coaches. But someone who is using their power with no regard or to intentionally harm or suppress, that's bullying. Intentionally trying to make people feel anxious or afraid, that's bullying. And unaddressed bullying essentially can chip away at folks' confidence. It can chip away at your sense of safety. It can even make you question yourself, because when someone is bullying you, for a lot of folks, the instinct is to kind of withdraw. And so you learn to silence yourself to avoid conflict. It conditions you to believe that standing up for yourself makes you difficult, or it makes you a target, and you start to kind of clam up to avoid that. I also think that bullying normalizes disrespect. You get used to experiencing it and you're less likely to say anything. And I'll be candid with you. I've been in rooms where I've made the mistake of not speaking up because I didn't want to be the problem, or I didn't want to be seen as difficult. And it didn't take me long to realize that silence doesn't solve the problem. It just makes me a part of the pattern. So if you're one of those people who thinks, okay, I'm just going to be quiet and I'm going to write it out, just know you're actually adding to the problem. Okay. I remember once I was on that very same team that I was talking about, where I was yelled at for taking all the air out of the room. So initially, like I said, my, solution was to try to be quiet and not say anything unless it was absolutely, necessary. Over time, the bully's behavior kind of got worse. It's almost like my silence was granting them permission to be obnoxious. So I immediately changed my behavior, because in my mind, I feel like if someone wants to make a scene, then I'm going to help you be the star of said scene. Now, how do I do that? Well, here are the steps. Number one, you have to first regulate yourself before you respond. Take a beat. If that's a step away, if that's get off the phone, remove yourself from the Zoom, step out of the meeting. The thing you want to know is that bullies often are looking for a reaction, and you honestly could just withhold your reaction and don't give them one. This is not the same as not saying anything, because when you're taking a beat, you should be doing some things to get yourself ready to navigate the conflict. Use your grounding practices. We've talked about box breathing. We've talked about meditation. We've talked about humming. Pause for a moment. Note your surroundings. That way you get a chance to respond instead of reacting. Alternatively, if you kind of feel a little bit emotionally regulated, you can look at somebody and just give them a little extra look. A little extra long look before you actually respond. So as an example, I was out on a team bonding lunch with the same team that I was telling you about earlier. And one of the bullies that was on that team saw I was not engaging in the conversation that was happening at the table. And the reason I wasn't is because it was about local schools, and I didn't have any kids that were attending any of those schools. So I had nothing to add. I know nothing about the schools in these areas. And so this one woman notices that I had on a collection of lapel pins on my jacket, and she awkwardly just kind of like blurts out in the middle of the conversation, "What do those mean?" pointing at the lapel pin. So now the entire table turns and looks at me. I literally just looked at her for an extra long time. Just an awkward set of seconds, just to collect myself. Plus, I feel like when you look at someone like that, you are letting someone know that I know what you're doing. So then I started in very calmly. Well, this lapel pin is a globe, and this one is a Walmart intern's pin. And this third pin is a black fist with the word free. Which pin would you like for me to explain the meaning of? Try it, right? Not rude, polite tone, said nothing out of pocket. But if you want to make a scene, let me build you a stage, right? And this leads me to step 2. So step 2 is try to name the behavior instead of the person. So instead of saying, "You are a rude person, you don't know how to behave yourself, you are disrespectful," you may instead say something like, "Your remark seems disrespectful." So instead of, "What are you trying to say?" you may say, Can you say a bit more about that? The reason I recommend this is that it keeps the focus on the impact instead of blaming, and it models emotional intelligence. So even if they're not extending that to you, you get to model it in the moment. Now, when naming the behavior doesn't quite feel like enough, I do what I told you in the last step. I put bullies' behavior center stage. I put them on the hook. Like, you got to explain yourself for this. So you want to make something of a black fist pen that says free? I am going to give you the floor so that you can, make your behavior the star of the show. You want to make snarky comments about my friend like it's a joke? I'm going to look at you a little extra long and then say, can you help me see the humor here? So now you have to explain it. You want to tell me that I take the air out of the room when I speak up? Every single time that I speak up from now on, I'm going to open that speaking up with, hey, I have something I'd like to share, but I want to make sure it's a good time first. Is it okay for me to chime in? So that you have to invite me to speak. Okay. Now, some will consider this petty, but you have to do it in the right tone. Hey, I have something I'd like to contribute, and I just want to make sure it's a good time. Is it okay for me to chime in? No snark. No snark. All right. If you do it in the right tone, what you're doing is you're teaching people how to be respectful of you, even if they don't like you. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like me. I am showing you that your behavior is the issue, and I'm going to center that. And all you have to do is be respectful. That leads me to step 3. The third thing that I think is super important is, set and enforce boundaries. Be clear about what you will and what you will not engage in. So that might sound like, I'm not willing to engage in a conversation if I'm going to continue to be interrupted. So if you want to set some time up to speak when we can do so respectfully, I'd love to do that. Note my tone. All right. Not dismissive, not rude, very to the point, very flat. Or again, sometimes you can role model the behavior you expect by making sure that behavior is invited. I have an idea I'd like to share. Is now a good time? Kind of like I shared before. When someone cuts you off after you've said something like that, I sit and wait until it's awkward. I literally will sit and wait. And then when it makes sense, I'll say something like, it is hard for me to contribute when I get cut off. Is it a good time for me to continue? Again, tone matters here. Use your kind tones, okay? And if you say any of this with any snark, just remember you're setting yourself up for more frustration. So we want to try to make sure that if our goal is to actually create some more connectivity, this isn't about being liked, but it is about perhaps creating an environment that works better for you. We've got to make sure we remove that snark. Now, if the behavior continues, we remove access to the degree we can. If it's a colleague, if it's a friend, if it's a family member, we want to make sure that we limit access from an emotional, social, or professional standpoint so that we have an opportunity to take better care of ourselves and not have to navigate the behavior. That leads me to the 4th thing. If you need to, in work settings, get some help if you need it. Okay. Document everything that's happening. Make sure that you're tracking what's going on. Involve your HR partner if you need to. Now, we all know HR is going to focus on protecting the organization first. So keep in mind, especially if that person that is bullying you is well liked, that may not be the easiest course of action for you. But if it is a circumstance where, you do have a good working relationship with your HR partner, definitely lean in that direction. Also, one of the ways it's kind of a sneaky way around some of this is if you have good relationships. There were some years ago that I had a really good relationship with the head of HR, and I was being bullied by my leader, my direct boss at the time. And she just happened to ask me if I was okay, and I burst into tears. Much younger in my career, didn't see it coming. She makes me set up a meeting to talk to her later. I tried to deny that anything was going on because I was embarrassed. And she basically pushed until I told her what was happening with my direct leader. And she handled it. I got removed from that team. He got put somewhere else. He ended up on a PIP, which impacted his ability to promote to the next job level. If you build the right relationships, sometimes that can work in your favor too. Also, if you're in personal settings, it still applies to get witnesses or support or help if you need it. It may look a little bit different, but it might be leaning on trusted friends or reaching out to a coach or therapist or someone who can really mirror reality back to you, especially when you're doubting yourself. You're like, hey, am I tripping? Is this person giving me a hard time? Am I overreacting? Am I being sensitive? What you don't want is for what the bully says about you to become how you treat yourself or to make that the narrative that you make for yourself. No matter what, keep your cool. And remember that bullying thrives on chaos and reactions. Find your way to calm. Find your way to calm, because being calm is a power move. The last step is, I think that there's an opportunity for you to reclaim your sense of identity, your dignity, your confidence, after a conflict. Okay. And the way that I think you do that is you take a moment to debrief with yourself. What happened? How do I feel about it? What do I want to be done differently next time? How can I reaffirm my worth? And that could sound something like, this person acted out of control. That doesn't mean that I don't have any power, or, I really do deserve to protect my boundaries, or, that didn't feel good, but I actually handled it really well. Don't isolate yourself. Make sure that you're restoring connection with safe people so that it rewires your trust system. So when you are dealing with a bully, don't just close off and disconnect. Get yourself around people who really care about you so that your nervous system knows good when you experience it. Bullies don't have to like your boundaries for them to be valid. They don't have to like you to respect your boundaries. And you also don't have to match their energy. What you do want to do is make sure you stand your ground, because every time you choose dignity over drama, it gives you a chance to reclaim your power. And that is kind of how you start humaning well. So boundaries, there's another episode where I can give you some specific steps around boundaries. It's a much more meaty conversation, but I wanted to at least give you some perspective about what you can do, including having good boundaries to navigate what bullies look like. We can human well even in tough spaces if we are mindful about the way that we are going to manage how we engage with people who think that they get to run over us. And so I want more of us to do that. Okay, so that's the episode. Next week will be the third installment of this capsule series on boundaries and power. If you're enjoying this, please stop right now, right now. Pick up your phone or whatever your listening device is and go down to rate this podcast 5 stars. And if you really like it, share it with someone you know. Trying to get the pod to get some attention and grow. And for that to happen, if you find this valuable, I would love for you to pass it along. Also, I think this is the last week for you to get your Be a Good Human hoodie. If you have any other merch, there's a hat. There's also a t-shirt. You can head over to ambercabral.com to get your product. And just so I can give you a heads up, we are closing sales on Friday, October the 24th. So if you haven't gotten it, by the time this podcast is posted, you'll only have a couple days left. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.